Hello, good morning, happy Mother's Day. Welcome to the Backyard Live with Aislynn and Joe. I am so glad to have you here, and I want to send an extra special happy Mother's Day to all the mamas out there and all the folks that are working so hard on taking care of all of our beautiful children in this community. All right, first thing at the very top, before we get deep into the garden today, I want to talk to you a little bit about some changes that have happened in my life. Last week, I decided that it was time for me to officially launch my own personal business as an edible landscape consultant and garden educator. So, some of you already know this information. I've been giving this live update every Sunday morning for several weeks now, a couple of months even, and now I'm officially able to do it for you in your own backyard. There are options for on-site, and there are also options for website, digital operations, things like that we can do as well. So, all right, let's get on with the show today, and let's talk about some things that I've already had some questions on this week, and some things that are happening with different types of harvests and different projects we're working on today. So, first of all, I want to start by talking about onions, because we've gotten to the point now where we're harvesting onions, right? Okay, so let's come around over here and let me show you some different onions I've got going on over here. So, I have planted, this is a red onion, and then I've got some 1015 onions over here as well. I also planted some Granix onions, Texas red. So basically sweet onions are the main types of onions that I've begun planting. Now, something you'll need to know about, a few things I want you to know about onions. There are different types of onions, bulbing onions. There are long day bulbing onions, short day bulbing onions, and neutral day bulbing onions. And what that has to do with is the length of daylight sun hours that onion needs to have in order for it to make a bulb. Well, the long day onions require a colder region. And then the neutral day onions really will grow anywhere except South Texas and Southern Florida, right? So that basically leaves us with the short day onions if we're really going to have those nice bulbing onions. Well, but that's okay, because we have some of the best onions in the entire country available in South Texas. You know them, the 1015 onion, right? These make the beautiful bulbs. And then of course we've got these delicious Texas red onions. Now, the perfect timing for planting your onions, your short day onions, is in the fall, November, December. Those are when you want to get those in the ground. And what you're looking for is getting the plant to where the onion to where this part right here can stay green for as long as possible before it begins to break and die. Because you're trying to get this bulb to get as big as possible. Okay? You can see that some of my plants, look over here at this one. This one has got a really thick stalk still. So I've still got some growth opportunity there. As long as this is green and it's not too hot and this isn't broken over, this bulb is going to continue to grow. But I have to begin pulling out some of the ones that have the broken tops. And the reason is because if I don't pull them out, I'm going to go ahead and pull this one right out here. If I don't pull them out, then they will start to rot with the moisture in the ground, right? So one of the things you need to notice is that this part's broken down so much that it's flat and it's dry. That's what you're looking for. Now this one you can see is still standing straight up. This one you can see isn't completely flattened over. I'm not quite ready. It's still doing a pretty good job. It doesn't feel like it's getting any type of mush or moisture. I'm really cautious of making sure I don't have mush or moisture around my onions, and so that I don't lose them, right? So I'm looking down here at this one. What's going on with it? Okay, it's still pretty firm. It's a tiny little onion, so I want to make sure. But this one over here, let me feel. Yep, it's probably time to go ahead and get that one out. And the other thing that's important about this, getting them out at this time, is it's a good time. Ooh, look at the nice roots that one had. So had this one not broken off and fallen down, it would have probably continued to keep making a nice size root. The earlier you get these in the ground, the more likely you are to have a really nice size bulb. The cooler the season is, the longer the cool season is, the better that it is to grow those bulbs and to keep those green tops. One thing you also need to know is that if they start to put on a flower, and that will be a very thick stem that'll go straight up the middle, and then it'll put this real pretty bushy flower at the top, just one nice onion flower at the top. Okay, if you see that, it's time to harvest that onion immediately, because what happens is that that bulb starts to put all of its energy into the flower, and the bulb will become mushy. So if you see a flower on the top of the onion, it's time to go ahead and harvest those out. Right, let's walk over to another little area. See, I've got some onions over here I'm keeping an eye on as well. This one has got a pretty broke down, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull that one out. Feeling these just kind of, okay, still a little sturdy. May keep an eye on that one, may pull it out today. See these here, still pretty sturdy. Still pretty sturdy, might give me some more bulb. That one's starting to get a little mushy. I think I wanna pull it out. All right, now let's walk over here, because this is another important part of this. You wanna make sure that you let your bulbs dry out. This is what I have come up with this year. This is my first year of really having onions here in this backyard garden. And what I came up with was this, we had already created this trellising type of system that I never have really grown much on because of the way the guttering is and some things I could fix over here with that. But this year it's really come into handy for drying out my onions. Now there's a couple of different ways you can handle it personally. Inside, if you want to take one that's really just kind of broke down or whatever, you could just really cut this top off, pull these roots off, and then just set it in a nice little pantry area with onions to begin to let it dry out. You could start using this immediately. You could actually use this onion today if you wanted to. The other option that you have, of course, is that you can tie them up in a system like what I've done here. And really, it's very easy to do that because they're so soft right there that all you're trying to do is get it to start drying out like this, right? There are some other options that some other people will do where they begin to just twist these onions up and hang them. So you could like create a braid out of all the different onions, several of them, creating a nice braid, and then hanging that from someplace that you have to hang them out at as well. So then what happens is, as this really dries real nice, almost like a cord, then what you can do, just hang this nice dry cord up, and then you can just cut the onions off when you're ready to use them and they've dried off. Always make sure that you're popping off the last of the roots that are down there at the bottom. That's one thing to do. Okay? So, and a lot of times your long day onions will come in little sets. I actually threw all mine out the other day, the old ones out the other day. But you're buying them in little sets. You're not buying the dried bulbs from the local stores, the big box stores. A lot of the big box stores are selling you long day onions. Long day onions don't grow here. What you're looking for is your local nurseries. I actually like to go a little bit more north to make sure I get my onions a little earlier than the nurseries get them down here. Sometimes I don't think the nurseries get them quite early enough for us down here. So I'll go north and get my onion sets. I buy lots of them. And the reason is because even if they don't all grow huge bulbs, one of the things that's really important in biodiverse growing, the way we grow here with the food forest and the permaculture growing, one of those concepts is that we're working on making sure that we're working on making sure that we're getting those plants in the ground as soon as possible, and that we're using them for companion planting. Sorry, running thoughts there. One of the things is allium plants are really, really good for helping to create pest control around other plants. One thing I will advise, and I could talk about this more in the future, is the idea of companion planting companions that don't go well together. So you do need to keep an eye on what onions don't like to be next to or what doesn't like to have an onion next to it. But otherwise, I poke onions in every hole I can find in all of my garden spaces because they're going to help with the different types of pests in that garden area. All right, so what are some other things that we're talking about today? Hummingbirds and red salvia. If you didn't notice, we had this beautiful cool front that blew in after a storm on Friday night. And of course the hummingbirds came out in mass quantities, right? So one of the things that I've been talking a lot about when I've been talking about biodiverse growing, permaculture growing, is the concept of making sure that you do have perennial flowers growing in your garden. Why? Because we want to draw in the beautiful birds. We want to draw in the pollinators that help us pollinate our annual vegetables. We want to draw in the beautiful birds because it makes us want to be in our garden more often. And anything that can make us want to be in our garden more often means we're going to do a better job caring for and taking care of our garden. So the hummingbirds are in love with this red salvia, red sage. Scarlet Sage is another name you'll see for it, Texas red. It is almost like a weed in my garden. For those of you that have been watching the show, you know I'm cutting salvia out all of the time. You can see me saying, okay, take the tops of this little seed right here and literally just toss it in my garden because I know it's going to come up some more.
Do that again?
Do it again?
Yeah, show me.
I just...
open your hand.
Like that.
So that's the dead head that you talk about.
And the seeds are actually like inside the little dead head there. But this is such a good weedy little plant that I just throw it anywhere. And it's going to come up. It's going to make some more stuff I can put in my compost if I have to cut it out. The red salvia actually flowers pretty much all year long. Now the indigo salvia is another one that they really, really like. The bees also really like this. Those wood bees, all the different types of bees really love it as well. This one doesn't flower all year long, but it definitely will flower when spring sets in. It's also one that's really loved. It also grows very weedy. A lot of the stretch of how I started with one plant, that's the thing. I'm talking about starting with a $1.99, $2.99 flower that I bought at my local nursery 5 years ago, stuck it in the ground.
You've never had to buy it since.
I've never had to buy it since. Right, exactly. And so that's a really important part of the way that I grow here.
So you scattered that so wide on this.
That's what you would call broadcast
on this
planting.
one hugelkultur bed. Are you likely then to see red salvia all over this mound because of what you just did in a couple of in the next season?
Well, I'm going to see it because I've done that over the years. I'm going to see that seed just seeding up. I mean, if you go along the edge of this garden, you'll see where salvia is just coming up. This is another one I do that with the Lyre leaf sage. I can just do the same exact thing where I just pop off the seeds and then just put it around. The thing about it is, and this is one thing I'll talk about here in just a minute, you want to make sure that all your garden holes are filled. Because if you don't have a plant that you want growing there, you'll have a plant you don't want growing there. And so that's an important part of helping you to keep the weeds off. It also helps you to keep moisture in, and of course all of that structure that we're wanting to make sure that we have, that the roots and the mycorrhizal that's being created by all the different plants that are going there. So for me, it's essential to plant, overplant, seed, overseed, and that's why I pull those things off and just throw them right back down again.
So you just pointed out this salvia plant.
That's actually a lyre leaf sage.
Okay,
it's another type of sage.
So here's one.
Yes.
If that's ever in the
weed.
way, it's something you don't want, you just pick it and
out.
get it out.
Yeah, or cut it out and throw it to the chickens or whatever. The chickens may or may not eat it, but they're definitely going to stomp on it and turn it into compost regardless. Right? Okay, so what are some of the other things that I'm getting to harvest right now in May? And besides the onions, I'm also seeing my peppers are really starting to come on. Now, I've been watching this pepper for a while. And for those of you that have been watching, you know that this is a Peter pepper. Oh, isn't that funny? Why might it be called a Peter, I wonder? Aren't they cute? I told my dad this last weekend when I was over at the farm, I said, I'm growing a Peter pepper. And he laughed and he goes, yes, back in the old days, our neighbor, when I was a kid, he grew a Peter pepper. And my dad just laughed and laughed because he thought it was so funny.
You picked this one up at a nursery, it looks like.
I did, and it was actually pretty expensive. It was an expensive little little pot type of thing going on there. Okay, I can still harvest my kale. This Dinosaur Kale, this Toscano Kale is very, very tasty, even in the summer. Some of this stuff, the weather hasn't been so miserable that the kale is not too bitter or anything like that, but Toscano is the one that stays the least bitter for the longest. One of the things I'm still checking on is to make sure that I have those cabbage loopers eating my kale, and if that happens, I just cut it off and throw it to my chickens. Chickens are an essential part of the way we grow in this biodiverse garden, of course. I'm also still able to harvest a little bit of that New Zealand spinach. You can see this. As the New Zealand spinach starts to flower, it starts to make smaller leaves and is less available for harvesting. But I'm also able to still harvest my longevity spinach, which is here. That's a really, really good, easy, edible landscape that everyone should have growing around. Some other things that you can harvest right now are your dill seeds. You can harvest them for replanting, or you can harvest them in the flowers and use them in your pickles if you're making pickles right now with your cucumbers that you're harvesting. So that's one thing we can talk about harvesting as well. Of course, we're also still harvesting lots of eggplants. I've got these coming off daily. This is the oldest eggplant. This eggplant here is probably 2-year-old plant that keeps producing really well. And then this is the young new one that I pulled off of just the other day, and now it's got some more flowers. You can see that.
Oh, show that to me.
There you go.
Very pretty.
Yep. But then if you look over here, this is one that I started from seed this year. And so it's already got one little eggplant coming on it as well.
Oh, from seed.
Yes. Okay. So as I'm talking about harvesting peppers, come around over here. I want to show you this habanero. Now, one of the things that I have been concerned about, and that I have mentioned a few times, is the idea that if I create the perfect sanctuary for the birds, then they're probably going to eat my red delicious tomatoes and my red delicious habaneros, and there's already been a little bit of that happening. So I will say that one of the things that's really important for me is to make sure that I'm doing what I call the happy balance. I am creating an ecosystem that meets not only my needs, but also the birds' needs as well. So I have to be aware of that. But one thing to keep in mind is this is the birdiest city in America, Corpus Christi, and we are seeing the bird migration and bird mating season right now. So if they're taking a few bites out of some of my vegetables, as long as they're not killing all of my fruits that I'm eating, I might share a little bit with them as well. Yeah.
I wanted to point out that behind you in the coop, there's a full-fledged bird assault on the kitchen scraps that we put in there this morning.
Oh yes, because we feed all the neighborhood birds.
There's a lot of food here, and the birds come and take advantage of it. There's no doubt about it. But are they getting your habaneros?
One of them did the other day. So I may start trying to take these habaneros off before they turn completely red. Right now they look like they're tie-dyed. Aren't they great? So this is a red habanero. These habaneros are on fire. They are actually very hot. So this plant was a nursery habanero that I bought from Pretty Small. It's actually 2 different plants. There's more than one plant in there. And I put it in the ground in spring last year. So this plant is over a year old, and now it is producing really well. I also have another really nice orange habanero in the front yard garden, which I haven't taken you guys out there, but at some point I will take you out in there, and what you're dealing with out there is a beautiful front yard garden growing vegetables that no one passing by would even know was a vegetable garden. So there's no argument over whether I can grow vegetables in my front yard, because I can completely grow vegetables in my front yard. Nobody even knows there's vegetables growing there. And if they did, I dare them to argue with me about it. I dare them. Ha ha ha. Okay, so here's another older plant, not doing quite as well, dealing with a little bit of, this and that type of things, but the plant is doing okay, and it's harvesting, and I'm able to harvest, and I'm putting on these little peppers. Truth be told, I have no idea what kind of pepper that is. That's what happens when you lose your little markers, and the plants are years old, right? Okay, so this is a plant that I did by seed here too. It's a bell pepper. I believe it's a Cal Wonder. Yep, this actually still has the name tag on it. The Cal Wonder. You'll see here, I also have lots and lots of sweet basil to harvest right now. So we could make, and I've mentioned to you, I'd like for us to make some sort of a pesto or something like that. So these are things you can harvest. Let me show you how to harvest basil, because it's important to know this part of it. You want to harvest between the 2 leaf. So I can either go here and take that part, or see, here's 2 leaves again. I can go here and take that part. Because what will happen if I do that, I'm going to take the one below it, boom, right there, is that those 2 right there will come up, and it will make 2 again. So now, and next time I'll have 2 of these to cut off rather than just 1. So I'm multiplying the basil by cutting it off in that way. So I'm going to cut it off above the 2 leaf mark, and then you'll see that one and that one will come up and be 2 different stalks. Now I've got this sweet basil like this pretty much in all of my peppers, around my peppers, in all of my tomato plants, and the reason goes back to that biodiverse growing again, that companion planting growing. And basil is a really, really good heat tolerant plant. It is also very good for insect control, and it increases the flavor of tomatoes and peppers. So make sure you plant basil around all of your tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, all of that type of stuff. It's a great companion plant. And the other thing is, when it starts to go to seed, like especially this variety, this Thai basil, this Thai basil is much more perennial. It doesn't die in the wintertime. It puts on purple flowers, and the bees and the pollinators love this one as well. So this is a good basil plant to grow all year long. It's the Thai basil, and you can grow it very easily by just deadheading the seeds, just like I've done before in the past. You can actually, I don't want to pull too hard on this plant, but there you go. See, I've deadheaded those. Actually, that's the seed right there. It falls out, little tiny black seed there. Okay, and then here, I'm just going to do this and throw it on top of there. All right, so those are the types of things we've been doing a lot of harvesting. Oh, I dropped my Peter. Sorry. Okay, let's talk about some other things. Let's talk about planting heat-tolerant plants. A couple of the things that were over in that garden over there that I didn't talk about, but I've talked about over the years, is a couple of heat-tolerant perennials that are planted over there. One of them is the Turk's Cap, and the other one is a plumbago. And both of those two can be almost completely ignored. They don't need a ton of water. Over in the chicken coop, you'll see that there's a hibiscus. Those are all plants you probably know, whether you garden or not. You probably have seen those plants around. Those are the types of things you can continue to keep planting through May. You may even be able to plant them in June if you're really paying a lot of attention to your summer garden. What I did was I went out to our local nursery on Friday, of course, you know, going out and looking at all the Mother's Day plants, and then went around to make sure that I could get a hold of some other flowers that I could put in this garden. Now, reminder, this particular garden is a first season garden, which means that I haven't, and the way that I grow, I'll remind you again, is a long-term commitment to gardening. So that means that while my first season might not be my best season, I'm going to have many beautiful, easy seasons in this garden. And I will not have to completely start over every year, because I'm just going to continue putting flowers and plants in this throughout the whole year. As much as I'm paying attention to the garden, I'm going to continue to put plants in. So that's what I was doing the other day at the nursery, was picking up some heat-tolerant plants. So things like yellow lantana. This will grow into a big, bushy, flowering plant. It is very heat tolerant. It can be completely ignored. You can put it in any of your perennial beds. You can put it in any of your gardens. It's a very good plant for pollinators. The pollinators just simply love it. If you're doing a specific thing for monarch butterflies, I had a little fly friend that was bugging me. If you're doing specific things for monarch butterfly gardens, your Turk's Cap, your lantana, those are all some, along with the milkweed, of course, are all some really good plants to have in your monoculture butterfly garden type of bed. Okay, what are some other heat tolerant plants that I planted? So a lot of you know this one. You see that little red flowered plant over there? That's Vinca. Most of you know Vinca. You've seen Vinca around. Well, if you have been paying attention in my other garden as it's grown older, and even in my front yard beds, I've always got pink, white, Vinca everywhere. It grows. It's a plant that can be completely ignored. It can be completely trimmed and cut out. It just grows into a nice perennial bush and is always going to put flowers on. And the interesting thing about wanting to make sure that you have flowers for your pollinators and your birds and all of that is that you have to make sure that you're flowering before your annuals start flowering. You want to make sure that you have something that draws those pollinators in before your vegetables that you need the pollinators for start putting their flowers on. So if what happens is that you plant all your plants at the same time and all your flowers come in after the pollinators have already kind of given up on your garden, then you won't have any pollinators even if you have flowers. So it's good to have all year long flowers growing in your garden. Here's some other types of flowers that can be good for heat tolerance. Verbena. Verbena is a really good heat tolerant flower. I like to go in and try to find different colored ones rather than the more traditional ones. But also there's a really simple purple, more wild verbena. I actually have one of those over there that grows really well from seed. That's really good and easy to plant in your garden as well. Those are other types of things that you can plant in your garden. Okay, so what types of things are we able to am I able to harvest potentially from this garden? Well, I'll tell you, my squash has had a hard time in this garden. Couple of reasons. Number one, I have more shade in this garden than I had initially thought. I'm going to have to keep an eye on this garden and see what happens during the summertime to see how much of the shade I need to trim up from the trees around here. But in this microclimate over here, I just simply don't have quite enough sun all day long. Okay? Now, that might be perfect in our super summer heat. I'm hoping that my squash, my cucumbers, everything are going to take off and be even more successful as the heat sets in from the summer, because I'm going to have more heat in this particular part of the garden, but also have some shade available. But the other things that I have to keep in mind is that with the hugelkultur beds, I've got a lot more heat in my breakdown, and I also have a lot more moisture and mildew and mold and things like that going on in this garden. So I'm still very hopeful. But at this point, I'm not really harvesting any squash. I am harvesting cucumbers. Let me go show you those. I'm still harvesting tomatoes. I'm eating green beans right off the vine. I'm eating tomatillos right off the vine.
Hey, if you eat all those off the vine, you're not bringing any inside for me to cook with.
No, because I don't have enough yet. I mean, I think that that's part of your kitchen garden. An important part of your kitchen garden is that in the beginning, it might just be a matter of, well, I'm getting a little bite out of my garden and I'm growing and building my garden. And in the future, I'll have a lot more vegetables and plants and seeds and everything coming out of this area. Now, here's another thing that I wouldn't call necessarily a heat tolerant, but it's something I wanted to give a try, especially in this shadier, cooler area, and that is comfrey. Comfrey is a really important plant for using for chop and drop composting, so basically green manure. I haven't talked much about chop and drop, but we can talk about that again in the future. And the reason I don't talk much about chop and drop is because I chop and feed it to my chickens. If you don't have chickens, chop and drop just means that you cut back all of that green material and then you just drop it down in your footpaths, and it helps to create compost in the area around your gardens. That's yarrow, comfrey. There are a lot of things that are really good for that. Some of the other cover cropping that I've been working on, and that is the idea of filling in all of these holes, wanting to make sure that I'm filling in all of the space. I don't want weeds to grow here. I want to make sure that there's structure being built in my garden, so I'm putting in black-eyed peas. Now that's really... Now this is the black-eyed pea that I planted. You can literally just buy a bag of cheap black-eyed peas off the grocery store shelf and just stick them in the ground, and then they're going to come up. The other thing that I'm putting in the ground is okra. Okra and Thai roselle as well. So now here's some more black-eyed peas. So one of the things that you can
those grow big and wide and broad.
They go big, yes. And they also add nitrogen to your soil. So that's one thing. They will also trellis and vine. So you can trellis and vine with your put those black-eyed peas near things that are going to give them some trellising opportunity. They don't have to be. I really want to make sure that I'm just filling in all of the spaces. So now I'm just trying to get whatever I can get planted going and growing in this particular garden. So Joe, will you just show everybody around real quick, and then let's walk over and talk about the chickens. Oh, one thing I did want to talk about is that it is time that you can begin harvesting your sunflower seeds. Take a look at this right here. You see that? You see those nice sunflower seeds in there? Mm-hmm. Now those you can either use for bird seed, you can use for your own reseeding for next season, or you could actually eat those. Those sunflowers are big enough, that particular sunflower is big enough to eat. There are more sunflowers of the big, and they grow a huge, that are available for you to actually eat from. But right now is also part of the harvest season for sunflower seeds. as these potted plants begin to get bigger, some of them will actually go into the ground. They may go into the ground in the fall. Do you see this old tomato plant here? She's about 2 years old now. She's still putting tomatoes on.
I was going to say, you're bringing tomatoes
Look at this. Isn't that interesting? Looking at that stem right there and how it's growing these nodules on it. There's so much to learn about in the garden. All right, it's Mother's Day. And of course, one of the things we want to talk about the most during Mother's Day is the idea of mamas that are all protecting their flocks, right? Well, I want to talk a little bit about protecting your flock. Chicken is an important part of the way we garden in our backyard homestead and in our biodiverse garden. So over the past couple of weeks, and yesterday I was in a conversation with someone who had a few questions about backyard chickens, and one of the things she mentioned was that they're pets and that she's going to get really attached to them, and that she wants to make sure she does it completely right so there won't be any tragedy. And of course, my initial response right away is to remind everyone that while we do have backyard chickens and while they do become pets, and while we do get to know them much better than we get to know our chickens on the farm, these chickens are still farm animals. And you will still have to deal with tragedy. The types of tragedy that you will have to deal with and that we've already dealt with in the recent past with our flocks. And I want to talk about protecting your flock, because ultimately, like any other pet, it is our responsibility to make sure that we're protecting our pets, our animals. We have a responsibility to the animals that we bring into our lives to make sure that they're well tended and that we've done everything in our power to protect them. Well, during the time that we've had these baby chicks, we have already lost one of our baby chicks. She was born scissor. There was a little power there for a minute. So she really just couldn't eat that well. And sometimes with some of the chickens over the years, we just realize that there's not much we can do to help them. And that's just what it is. Part of that is that we don't have really a chicken veterinarian in our area, a small animal veterinarian in our area, that we could easily take and get answers from to those questions. We do everything we can to find out the information that we can to cure them. Joe, you have cured chickens over the years. As a matter of fact, one of our chickens, her name is Mother Clucker. She literally only has one eye, and that's because you tended her, you took care of her, and you saw that there was a problem. But sometimes
the level of homesteading that you're doing here really it requires one to become a jack of all trades.
Oh, sure. Yes.
We're doing temporary fencing and of course all of the gardening and any kind of like you said, basic veterinary for chickens. You're going to learn a lot in this journey.
Right. Exactly. And so over the years we have come out, and maybe a chicken that we had a house chicken, we kept calling her because she was really weak and the other chickens were picking on her and she had something wrong with her. We got her up and running, we got her happy, we got her well, and then put her back out. She was all a part of the flock for a long time, and then we came out one day and she had passed. Another time we just came out and one of them had passed, and we didn't really know what was going on.
A lot of heat, I think.
Yeah, the heat, they don't. Some of the chickens and some of the breeds don't like the heat, and that's some of the things I've been talking with folks about, heat tolerant chickens and making sure that you're purchasing or choosing the heat tolerant breeds.
I will just interrupt you to quickly say that when we bought ours online, one of the search filters you could do for looking for different birds to buy was heat tolerance.
Yeah.
And in South Texas, that was an important one to us. There's no reason to senselessly lose a chicken because you choose one that can't hang out in our 100-degree August.
Right, and that's exactly right. And so those are some of the types of tragedies I'm talking about. So in the last 3 days, in the last 3 weeks, we lost one of our scissor-beaked ones, and then we had one of our older ladies that passed. Now that was a pretty sad story. Harvey was her name, and that's because, interestingly enough, we somehow like to get chickens in the middle of the great catastrophes in our area. hurricanes, pandemics, whatever, you name it. But we thought it was fun and funny to name this one little chick who had a really hard time making it through the hurricane that actually lived, named Harvey. And we had an incident where we closed up the coop one night, and because we had gotten so easygoing about the chickens, and that we're great chicken folks and we know how to handle our chickens, that we hadn't done a count of heads when we closed up the coop, and one of our chicken ladies had not gotten in the coop that night, and a critter got her. We think most likely a possum.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, possums don't usually mess with the chickens. Usually they just get the eggs, but she was perfect to be gotten that night. And the reason is because chickens cannot see at night. So once the sun starts to set, that's the reason they rush to their coop and get up inside their roosting space, is because they can't see well. So if one of them was out kind of late as the sun was setting, and then she couldn't figure out how to get in and the door was closed and she had a hard time getting in, then she's basically just ground meat. And she did. She went to sleep on the ground, and that was the last time we saw her. All right. So that being said, the next thing is these babies. And how do we protect these babies, right? So you've got to make sure that you're giving them a very safe space, a nice caged area. But then you also have to make sure that your garden, your fencing, your gates, and all of that stuff are really, really well protected. And that your gates are closed, because without a doubt, guaranteed, there will be a dog that will come into your backyard, and there will be a potential problem. And so yesterday, luckily, they're all still alive because all our little babies, they hid real well. But there was an issue with a dog that came into the backyard. I mean, and we had just checked on those babies, but it's come so fast. So we have to make sure that we keep our gates closed. Luckily, all our little hens just went and hid in all the different places. That's something to keep in mind about your homestead as well, that you're making sure that you're keeping spaces that allow the wildlife or the animals to hide and be protected in case there's an issue. And certainly all your chicks. And that's part of the reason why we leave all that brush. That's part of the reason why we leave trees and things growing within our chicken coop, because anywhere our chickens can hide themselves when there's some sort of predator is going to give them a better option. These are the things that you can do to protect your flock. And mamas and daddies out there that are celebrating Mother's Day together, I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. We're doing everything we can to protect and love our flocks. All right. I don't want to leave without reminding everybody that Dinner Table Talks launches tomorrow. That's Joe and Aislynn's podcast, where we talk about all the great food that we eat using all the delicious vegetables that we're using out here in the garden. It's where we talk about all the fun things going on with our friends and our teenagers and all of the things that we do at the dinner table and the fun conversations. You never, never, never know what's going to come up on Dinner Table Talk. So check that out, dinnertabletalks.com. Episode 36 launches on Monday morning. And that's all I have to say today. Happy Mother's Day. I love you all. Peace. Enjoy your gardens.